German director Tom Tykwer already opened the Berlinale on 3 occasions. He is also known internationally as one of the creators of the successful period series Babylon Berlin. His new film, The Light, takes us to present-day Berlin and was screened outside the competition as a Berlinale special gala, with an outstanding cast, including Nicolette, Krebitz, Lars, Eidinger and Thala al-Din. The film tells the story of a middle-class family in which everyone focuses pretty much on their own lives until Farah, a mysterious Syrian domestic help, is hired. She thoroughly upsets the family routine and dislodges many certainties. Naturally, Tom Tykwer invited her to the press conference for the opening film of the 75th Berlinale, The Light.
Wir sind das Musterbeispiel einer Familie, an der diese Welt zugrunde geht. Wir leben egoistisch und ignorant und verschwenderisch und vulgär.
Ja, wir heizen mit Gas, das wir verteufeln. Wir haben ein Ferienhaus, wo keiner mehr hin will. Mama steigt 5-mal im Monat ins Flugzeug, während Papa in die Welt rausposaunt, dass Fliegen gesetzlich strafbar gemacht werden soll.
Wir nutzen hemmungslos alle Privileges, die weiße, reiche Mehrfachverdiener in der westlichen Welt genießen.
Bestellen Bio-Wein bei Amazon, weil der Weinladen um die Ecke pleite gemacht hat. Und der hat pleite gemacht, weil alle noch Bio-Wein bei Amazon bestellen.
Ja genau, das ist so fucked up.
Ununterbrochen Essen liefern, ich auch. Und Papa bestellt seine Zigaretten und auch manchmal nur die Blättchen für seine Joints bei den Fahrradskaren.
Wir sind der Grund, warum die Welt am Arsch ist. Nicht die anderen, über die wir ständig abkotzen. Wir!
Wir sind der Grund, warum die Welt am Abgrund steht. Nicht die anderen, auf die wir mal alles schieben wollen. Wir!
Wir leben egoistisch und ignorant und verschwenderisch und vulgär. Nach wie vor nutzen wir hemmungslos alle Privilegien, die der westlichen Welt vorbehalten sind. Und unterstellen, dass es immer die anderen sind, deren wegen unser Planet am Abgrund steht. Diese anderen, das sind wir selbst. Es ist an der Zeit, dass wir endlich Verantwortung übernehmen. In unserem ganz persönlichen, privaten, intimen Lebensraum. In jeder erdenklichen Situation unserer Alltagssphäre. Weil nur wir es sind, die es vermasselt haben. Und weil nur wir es sind, die jetzt und nicht morgen alles ändern müssen. Wir sind der Grund, warum die Welt am Abgrund steht. Nicht die anderen. Wir.
Achso, wer das braucht. Wer weiß, welche Art von Sprachen so auf uns zukommen. English, French, German, können wir alles. Hallo. Kommt ihr gerade erst aus dem Kino alle?
Are you just getting here from the cinema?
Auf dem Kino lief denn eigentlich die Presse?
What cinema did they screen this for the press?
Heute war wo?
Gestern war Blumax.
In Blumax. Ach ja, gegenüber.
Okay, so that was Blumax today, right across the street.
Nein, wirklich? Ja. Danke. Dankeschön.
So. Herzlich willkommen.
Right, a cordial welcome on the occasion of the press conference for The Light, the opening movie of the 75th Berlinale, as a special gala. And I would now hereby welcome the film crew and team, starting on the left. Let me start with the producer, Uwe Schott, who has worked multiple times with Tom Tykwer, among other things also in Babylon Berlin, and he's the producer of this movie as well. Next to him, in her first feature film main role, Thala al-Din, congratulations and welcome.
Der Regisseur, der
the director,
Licht nun zum
who
dritten Mal
with
die
The
Berlinale
Light
eröffnet
has
und damit
now
einen
opened the
Rekord
Berlinale
hält.
for the third time,
Tatsächlich
and he's
zuerst
now a
mit
record
Heaven,
holder,
dann mit
first with
International
Heaven,
und
then
nun
with
eben
International,
mit Das
and
Licht
now
und
The
natürlich
Light.
Regisseur von
And he's
unglaublich
also the
vielen
director of
großartigen Filmen,
so
die wir alle
many
kennen.
incredible
Willkommen,
movies
Tom
that we
Tykwer.
all know. Welcome, Tom Tykwer. In the role of Milena in this movie, we see Nicolette Krebitz, who herself also in 2022 presented a film as a director, and she is now one of the main leading characters in this movie, returning to the festival. And there's also another film with her. But welcome, Nicolette Krebitz. And to my right, an actor that we all know, of course, internationally and in Germany. I think every year, with at least one film represented here at the Berlinale for quite some time. A cordial welcome also to Lars Eidinger. And of course, we also have simultaneous interpreting services should you need them. Let me start with a question, but feel free to prepare for your own questions and then raise your hands. Tom Tykwer. Now, almost 10 years have passed since you had the hologram working in cinema, and then there was Babylon Berlin in between. Why was it time now for this movie with these topics? It appears to be also a very personal movie with a lot of passionate energy that you get to feel when you see the film. Why these topics? Why this movie now? Well, for so many years we've worked on Babylon Berlin, and we swam, if you will, through a time that was really way there in the past, and that we watched through the eyes of our grandparents. And I found it very interesting to look through the eyes of my imaginary grandparents and to experience these historical changes. But then, of course, I mean, what happened too is, and this is something that we could not foresee, is that there was this increasing symmetry, between the things that we reported on from a time that had been that was so far in the past, and the things that were happening here in our society, socially, politically. And then I felt this pressure rising and growing in me. I thought, well, that was the topic for my grandparents, but now, of course, there are similarities that many people also try to talk about. But of course, the people are different now. We are no longer our grandparents, and our children are much less like our grandparents. And I mean, our children, not everyone's children, but the generation that I'm talking about, that this film is talking about, those youngsters are almost young adults themselves, and it's really different as to how we encounter these topics today. And I wanted to give that a voice because I thought that there were stories that were really not, being told enough. You just mentioned it, the intergenerational dialogue that is a topic of this film, or rather the non-communication, that you also tried to show there. But how important was it to you to also have this very empathetic view of the Generation Z and the follow-up generations? Well, I think it's always helpful to do that together with the actors, to find the people just like we found each other, with whom you can express these things from the inside. Have an inside view. I somehow have to be able to do this as part of a group. That I don't think, there is something that I consider to be strange and that we should show. No, we have to look for commonalities and find them. And what struck me is that between these two generations that this film is about, that there is really an abyss. And there is also a reproach that one side is making to the other. That is, I think, also a justified reproach, and that is that they've missed the train. That's what the younger generation tells us. But there is also something of an intertwined dimension that allows us to actually still access each other's lives. And that really was very helpful to me. Both when it comes to the three grown-ups that I'm sitting here with and the young adults, that we just were able to sit down and talk about these things, enough. We didn't really rehearse that much initially. We really talked a lot, so that we then had the feeling that all of us knew what we were talking about. And then the difference suddenly no longer is just as important, that you would point your finger and say, okay, this generation is that way or that way, but that we really got closer together also in terms of the energy that we felt. But we, as the grown-ups, if we were just as outraged, we would be yes, outraged about those who have missed the train, if we were that young. Okay, there is a question. Over there, second row. Do we have a microphone?
Hello,
Natalia Juk from Carta Berlin. And I've got two questions. First of all, the film is so complex and so, there are so many layers to this film, and it also opens up a debate. I would say that there is no specific answer to questions, but there are many different questions there that are being asked. How important is it to you to make this a controversial movie? To me, at least, some of the topics were controversial. So what does that mean to you? And what do you think happens to the protagonists later, down the road? And the second specific question is, well, the city of Berlin in this movie, on the one hand, is also a character, if you will, because it makes up a large part of the movie. Now, what I mean is that the city itself is also an important part of the story. And what was your conception of that particular, film of Berlin? It looks like a city in magical realism, It's not always raining in Berlin, but in your movie it is. And the whole world in your particular city of Berlin really impressed me. I think it was a very important part of the movie. So how did you construct this alternative version of Berlin? Well, getting back to your first question, the controversy. Well, the fact that the movie is a controversial one, I hope that's what's happening inside of you, that you feel that there is a controversy, because the movie in itself, the film, is, I hope, rather understandable, logical, at least in terms of its attitude, its stance, it's not on the fence with a view to any of the topics. It's got a very clear positioning, but it, of course, also relates and refers to all of us and everything that surrounds us. And, we could, of course, rather specifically talk about ourselves, because we try to take an honest look at ourselves. That is a precondition, of course. But that's also what was difficult for us to do, because, we really had to get invested, We thought we could not tell this story, behind a protective shield. We just have to leave that out of the equation so as to make sure that this vulnerability of the characters is real, because that's what it's all about, And that is what gives this movie the sense of intimacy and subjectivity. But what it does at the same time is that the whole world that is firing at us with all these contradictions and also controversial topics, where it's now so difficult to, find your own position. But I think that we can do that, and we can and should do that. And it's not really all that difficult to do it either. If you just, think of some basic principles that have something to do with the fact that we have to try and get closer to each other again. There is this tendency currently of people isolating themselves, and I thought that this microcosm really showed that clearly. Everyone was in their own, fish tank. They built their own fish tanks, put their heads in there, and in their direct vicinity, everything is nice, but no one is even talking to each other any longer. It's like they have their heads underwater. But then there is this energy that comes from the outside, gets them out of their fish tanks, allows them to get closer to each other again. And that's the movement in this microcosm that we also have at the macrocosmic level, politically speaking, that, also with a view to our longings and our desires to the world. And that is the only way, I think, how we can really deal with the problems that we are currently faced with. Okay, so this is my effort to, how I try to answer your question about the controversy. The second question related to the city of Berlin. Well, Berlin, to me, is just the greatest cinema city in the world, because it is just a city that is unfinished, and it is really doing its best to never be a finished city. As soon as it looks like things are done, then you get another 2,000 construction sites on top, and there are grotesquely ugly things that are built next to wonderful buildings, and you ask yourself, whoever approved that? But at the same time, things are happening, and and you're also quite happy that not all the things work out in this city, because there is a lot of movement, and sometimes, it's vexing, annoying, but, it's the city that you live in, that you talk in, that you fight in, that and I mean, this, what is originally negative, a mismanagement in city planning and architecture, is something that I secretly actually like, because I've got the feeling that once it's finished, you've got something standing there, and it looks noble and polished, and that you can tell by watching movies that play in cities that are perfect, But in Berlin, everything looks as if it's almost dilapidating again, and it's just being, repaired shoddily. And this is the kind of interim state that you can really use very nicely for filming, because sometimes you find a corner in the city that looks beautiful, and 5 meters down the road, you've got the wrecking ball flying around. I just recently saw a construction site of a construction site. So they repaired a construction site, basically. Because, they had this construction site for such a long time at the same spot that they thought they'd have to repair a few things. Did you take a picture there? Could you take a picture? No, not really. But that would have been a very typical picture of Berlin. Okay, and at the same time, the rain, as I said, Berlin is in a constant state of confusion, and the rain was very helpful, because the rain, and that's the crazy thing, you can put two people in the street, and it's not a very intimate space, because it's out there in the public, but the rain would build an acoustic zone around them, but something like an invisible wall around them as well, that makes it so cozy between them. But of course, it's not cozy for shooting a movie in those conditions. Everyone was always soaked to the bones, including me. But, it creates this kind of bizarre proximity. I mean, when you're shooting a film in the rain, you have to use 5 times the amount of regular rain so as to make it look like it's really raining. And it's also very loud, so sometimes people have dialogues and they don't even understand each other. I remember, Lars, we had one scene where no one really understood the other one, and you would actually read the other person's emotions from their lips and then play accordingly. But it really creates a sense of proximity. People feel like they're close to each other, although they're in this huge city. Great effect. We have got another question here.
Sleman Abdullah from Receive 22. I have 2 questions on the Syrian protagonist, Farah, for the director and for the actors as well. On the screenplay level, what inspired you to write a German-Syrian story, so to say, a Syrian character? What kind of research did you do to write the character? The second question regarding the Syrian dialect. There is a potential audience here in Germany, about 1 million Syrians. How long and how did you work on the dialect aspect to make the character authentic and believable? Did this play any role in casting process as well? Thank you.
Okay. In English?
Auf Deutsch, das wird dann übersetzt.
Auf Deutsch, okay. Für mich war das total wichtig.
So, for me, it was extremely important, that I should have a Syrian dialect. That was, personally, to me, that was very important. And feel free to correct me. I'm just talking about what my feelings were about what you thought, and then you can confirm it. If it's true. But, when I first read the script, the character of Farah, for me, was just one huge metaphor. And she was also the, most cryptic character of them all. That is the most enigmatic character that were presented in the movie. And there is a reason for that, because, of course, it's been written by Tom Tykwer. And the closeness to the characters, that, are born within him, I'd say, is a different one. And, you know, it's not quite as dense and poetic as it is then with the character of Farah. You know, I like it about her, but it was also a challenge in terms of how you approach this character, how you play that character and turn them into a human being and not leave them at the stage of being a poem or a metaphor. And my main axis was through language. And I was able to work with a great dialect coach. And I was also lucky enough to have, you know, 2 family members in my movie who are from Syria, Mudar and Mido. Mohammed, and you know, I was a bit obsessive. I told them to please always correct me. And I can't really recall when we started working with the dialect coach, but that was one of my basic elements that I really clung to when it came to developing the character, honestly. I hope that answers your question. Well, I could just add to that briefly. The only thing that I was interested in when, you know, when I was looking for Farah, or rather the actor to play Farah, and it really didn't take that long because we met relatively quickly. You know, that one thing that I thought was important was that, you know, she should, you know, have a kind of a realness to her, you know, and this adds to what Farah just said. I didn't want her to be, you know, an angelic kind of figure, although it may appear to be such a figure, you know, when she starts, you know, influencing that family. But, you know, that this should be a person with real roots, a real history that's also plausible, and that this should play a role. And I mean, that's not, that's something that you could probably work on and develop, but, and I hope that I'm not exaggerating, but I think, you know, that, I think that even after 2 minutes, the whole thing was pretty clear, even after 1 minute. You know, we had a very brief tape, you know, as actors today, they are now shooting scenes, you know, to themselves, you know, in the living room or in the bedroom, you know, using their phones as a camera, and, you know, it's incredible the things that are possible today. Yes, just like on the OnlyFans platform, yeah. But it still, you know, gives you, allows you to have a feeling for the person, but still you have to meet them in person, and that meeting was very important to me. And even, you know, after 2 minutes, I knew that Thala would, you know, make sure that this person, the character, has her feet firmly planted on the ground, and that she's not interested in all the speculative aspects of this character, but that it's rather clear that this is where she's from, that's her background, she's got this kind of gravity which is never going to leave her, even if she's got the depth and the humanity and her knowledge and her education, but she will always have that other element as well, and that introduced the whole world into the character. And I think the weight that the character has in the movie, you know, I've never really felt that much that you know, how dependent it was on finding the right person.
Ida Bach, freelancer. Ich würde gerne Tom Tykwer eine Frage stellen.
Ida Bach, I'm a freelancer. I would like to ask Tom Tykwer a question. Just talked about the different voices of the different generations that, you know, confront each other there, and you said that you had an exchange with the younger generation. But I mean, you're the director, you also were the screenwriter. So is it not rather more your voice than the voice of the younger generation? And the younger generation that's represented in the movie is also not the entirety of this young generation. It's just the children of the upper middle class. It's a small segment, right? And we don't really see anyone else being represented there. So this small privileged segment of the young generation, and how far are they representative of the rest of them? Well, of course, that's always true. You know, the idea of you know, representation or being representative, you know, it only is plausible to a degree if and when the people who are doing it know what they're doing. And I know that you can try to understand and feel the things in so many different areas. But if you are, and when you're getting that close to people, and to try to be so intimate about them, you have to be very specific. And if you manage to do that within this smaller segment, to really show something that is truthful still, I think it radiates beyond that particular small group. And I'd say that, it's representative for a broader middle class, all those people that somehow, in my age at least, think that they are actually, doing the thing, they think that they are controlling things or, getting things done. Whether that's justified or not, that's always the question. But their children now find themselves in conflicted state. That's also just a representative state of conflict. You can only show parts of a certain part of society, but if you really capture that well, then I think it can really reach out and touch so many other aspects as well. Thank you. Yeah, and I believe that it's important. It's a good thought, really. And my answer to that would be, the more personal a film is, the more universal it becomes. That, at least to me, is the main headline here, the claim for this movie that says, we are the reason why the world is on the brink, not the others. It's us. And I would also say we are living in times of narcissism and are obviously being governed by people. I mean, the most powerful people in this world are people who quite apparently have a narcissistic personality disorder, and I even go so far to say that we all suffer from that. Now, the question is, what do I mean by saying that? Well, I frequently think that narcissism is being misinterpreted at times. It's not really looked at in all its complexity, because a narcissist, that's a description of someone who is in love with themselves, who's just, revolving around themselves, who may be vain. But the way I understand the story, a narcissist is someone who does not or is not able to love themselves because they're not able to recognize themselves. So they have to stay, be a stranger to themselves. And this film I see as an offer by Tom Tykwer to tell a personal story that we can encounter ourselves and recognize ourselves in. And there is this central point in time where, the character of Tale enters into this family, and just like in Teorema, acts like a kind of a catalyst, and then leaves the family there alone around the table and says, okay, now show yourselves to each other and allow the others to recognize you without reproach and without any judgment. And I think this is the central statement of this movie. If we manage to be courageous enough to show who we are in the movie or in the arts, and to allow the other to recognize themselves in that, then you can actually change the world. There's a great play by Bertolt Brecht, Change the World, It Needs It is, I paraphrase the title. It's about the death of Hans Eisler. And, and the main question is, who are you? And that's really the key, the question of who I am. So, and it doesn't really matter who this group is standing for, whether they're representative. What's important is the gesture that someone says, I allow you to recognize who I am. And that is why I really like this project right from the start, that Tom Tykwer has the courage to say, okay, I am putting myself there in the center of attention. I'm showing my family, I'm showing my life, that's me. So if you take this phenomenon into account, that this allows us to also see ourselves in that. Because, of course I'm interested, but I'm probably not interested enough in Tom Tykwer's life. I'm interested in my own life, and I would assume that that's true for everyone. That all the people are here because they want to learn more about themselves. And, not just because they want to see great actors in a great movie. It's always about the grand question of who am I? I would now like to give the floor to Nicolette Krebitz, who is playing Milena in the movie. And you know what Lars just mentioned, you know, the kind of outer shell that these characters are living in an isolated fashion. And then, you know, how Farah breaks up those shells when she, you know, joins the family, if you will, and how she triggers a kind of a chaos in the family. And how, you know, Milena has the friction with her daughter, but also with her husband. There's such a great scene. Perhaps, Nicolette, you can tell us a bit about what made it so interesting for you to get this onto the big screen, and also about the cooperation with Tom and the others. Well, initially, when I read the script, I thought, wow, yes, of course I'd like to play this character. And the more we, you know, worked on the movie, on the film, I started asking myself, well, who am I? And who is that Milena? So time and again, I mean, up to and including the last day of shooting, you know, I kept asking Tom, but who am I? It was very complicated for me to really pinpoint who that character is, because there are also, you know, I had this kind of resistance against, you know, showing myself as being a flawed person, or, you know, us, the privileged people in the West, that we're flawed, you know, with our egotism, the selfishness, that we're revolving around ourselves, all the things that may not come across as very likable initially, you know, but then, you know, you have to also admit that that's just the way things are in many places, you know, and I didn't want to exaggerate things or, you know, make it turn it into a caricature. I just said, okay, let's assume I'm that way. Then it doesn't always feel great to play that, but that was, of course, our task, you know. And then to also, you know, meet Thal's character, and to then just say, okay, I'll try and follow someone. I mean, there is this slogan from Instagram, but I like it really a lot, and it says, if you can't take it anymore, give. And for that particular role, that was a phrase that I really, really liked. And I think in, you know, the character of Thal, it was actually in a similar situation, or she felt in a similar way, but that was, you know, the main message to me, that with this film we're trying to say that it's worth trying to meet others, and to also try and allow the strangers, also the stranger inside of you, to be a flawed individual, and to not always be, you know, a person of moral integrity that you so frequently encounter, especially in German films, because it's not always like that. And that was a task that I found rather difficult too. We've got another question over here. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Laura from Spain. A question to Mr. Tykwer, but all the others can feel free to also chip in. So, Mr. Eidinger already mentioned it, but I would like to better understand the following idea. I mean, you talked about the contradictions and the confusions and the, you know, between the characters and how they are connected. Perhaps you can expand on that, and perhaps you could also tell us a bit about the daydreaming. You know, they represented a bit of a hope, right? They were these incisive moments during the moment. I hope that was understandable. Well, let me just start with the last part of your question. What you so nicely described as daydreaming, that's a very nice term. I never really saw it that way, but it's a rather fitting. Yeah, I mean, there are, you know, a few standards. I mean, there are so many standards when you know, making films or, you know, shooting films for the cinema. And one of the standards is that you would have a psychologically connotated film, and each and every protagonist would get their moment when their inner life is being turned outside, you know, and that's, you know, kind of an inner monologue, perhaps, that, you know, that just touches upon what moves them, you know, or the typical scene in a bar after the fourth drink when people start telling the truth about themselves, laying it all bare. And we were thinking about what would be good about that, but what could also be deficient in such a situation. And I sometimes think, well, then cinema sometimes is absent in this situation, because, cinema allows us sometimes to do many things without talking too much. And situations that have an influence on who we are and what we do are sometimes beyond words. And then it became apparent to me, well, this could be, done with the help of music, sometimes with lyrics, sometimes without lyrics. But music, also leaves a mark on who we are and how we live. But that music also can help, create something that tells something about who we are. And we can express ourselves through music, but also through dancing, through movement. And I thought that was so much richer then. And I wanted to just seize the opportunities that cinema has to offer. And that we could just get started with these things, and just try and tap into all of these ideas. We had some crazy ideas. We thought, well, what is the son, the gamer boy, what's he doing? What does he actually want to do? He's flying through these spaces. Well, it's a kind of a state of energy that he is in love with. And when he then starts, developing desires, they have to be in zero gravity. And we thought, okay, how can we do that, how can we come up with a scene that allows us to use zero gravity? And then we came up with a song that celebrates this. But, it's also about the child that's almost grown up, but still somehow a child that also tries to explain to himself what's happening without words. Sometimes there were words in the songs, but it was really great fun to be able to use all of these different varieties, all of these different opportunities that lay right in front of us. And that's also why I go to watch a movie in the cinema. I know that things in cinema allow to, in the cinema, things can happen in a very unexpected way, and that can give depth to the characters and the story. And I forgot the first part of the question. Are there contradictions? I would like to also ask a question to Uwe Schott, the producer. Now, today, what does it mean to create the necessary creative spaces for directors like Tom Tykwer and the team, to allow them and to enable them to shoot in so many different places in a city and to also integrate that many elements? Well, artistically, you agree at the point in time when you get started, right? And then you really want it. And you also need a shared vision. Of course, it's his vision, but you want to support it, You want to go along with that. And then you will have to just, get started, get going. And, to have the necessary space means to have shooting days. It means, producing the rain. It's always money. Unfortunately, it's always about finances in the end. And right now in Germany, it unfortunately is hard to make a German language film that requires a 2-digit million budget, but with a lot of energy and with a partner like Tom, who is also a producer together with me, you can actually manage to do that if you find the right partners. But what's also true is that, towards the end, you always run out of money, the money that you need to create these creative spaces. And I think the funding, was only ever agreed upon, 3 weeks before we started shooting. Sometimes it's like that, but if you pursue this path, you also accept the risk, and the result is what you've seen here today. But I would also like to add to that, because just recently it's it strikes me when talking about this. Of course, it's incredibly hard, to put these films together. If you try to come up with real juicy cinema, then it's of course always too costly, too expensive. But we somehow managed to get to where we wanted to get to. And, we also had some crazy partnerships that we're very happy about. But I also have to say that, at least in my life, there are always, the public broadcasters, they are real heroes. I mean, there are always these discussions about their role in society, but, they also made a substantial contribution. The ZDF German television program said, yeah, okay, let's go. And sometimes people talk badly about them. I could never confound that, because without them, we could not have done this. I mean, we had Better Film as the world distribution and ZDF German television as the main partners. Had we not had these partners initially, we couldn't have even gotten started. And after that, of course, the funding programs, but still, still, you're then still looking at a gap of 10 to 15%, and you have to try and find the money. Yes, but those are the partners that, that I think really are great, because we could really work together at eye level, also with all those that promoted and supported us, And there were no struggles. It wasn't, okay, why don't you give us this or that? No, but there was a real commitment. They just recognized the value of the project, and then they helped us in any way they could. That was my impression. Because, people like to complain all the time. But I have to say that I'm really very proud that we were able to do this together with all of these different partners. We've got time for one more question.
Question here from Brazil, Rodrigo Fonseca. Question to you, Tom. Could you say a few words about your work with your cinematographer? And if you could comment a little bit, the amazing scene of the bicycle race that means romantically a lot in the film. It looks like a nouvelle vague homage.
Well, the bicycle racing scene, that's of course something of a secret tribute to Jules Jim. It's a kind of a comparable place, and I always wanted to see that in a movie, in my own movie, of course. I mean, it's been used in other films probably, but to have these tracks there on the stilts in Skalitzer Straße in Kreuzberg, one of the most beautiful places in the world, I think. And then you had these rain curtains to the left and to the right. So to me, it was really great that we could realize that. But the scene is also a very important place for the character of this man, who really tries to fully enjoy his own desires, and that's one of those points where I thought, okay, this is where these generations are strangely interlinked, because you could have had almost the same scene, shoot it with a daughter. That's also something that I had to think about when we were editing the movie. That children and their parents, or young adults and older grown-ups today, that they are so much closer to each other. And that also allows for a kind of a connection that has not been really used to the full. It's got more potential. And that's also something that I realized in that scene, the kind of playfulness, the childlike stance of the protagonist there. That's also why we later had also a club scene with everyone. And we had, mixed generations. And I mean, that's quite frequently the case, The ravers are growing old, but they're still going to the clubs and to the raves. And it's either the younger ones who will have to accept that they've got all these old Jesus there in their clubs, or they perhaps even like it. But I think that both is true, and that's also something that is a common thread here. I thought, how can we shoot this without, being too kitschy or looking through the wrong kind of lens, How can we still be real? Well, because these things are even closer enmeshed than in the past. And I think that's not specific to any kind of social class. I think this is really a phenomenon between the generations today. And this offers a huge opportunity that we can create a different sort of community as compared to the previous generations, where everyone really had to distance themselves from their parents' generation as much as they could. And now we've got this fascinating level of closeness that we can actually benefit from a lot. And what was the other aspect? Not just the bike? Oh, yes, of course. Christian Almesberger, our cinematographer. I mean, he is the marvel, the miracle that came to Earth from some kind of different planet. This is a guy, you can just present him with the most outlandish requirements, and he's going to say, well, give me 4 minutes for something where you just think he says, okay, yeah, we could start working on that tomorrow. Or, you want to turn around the camera and, no lighting has been set up and the sun is going down, and can we still do it? And he says, well, okay. So he is really someone who probably never in his whole life never said no ever since the day he was born. And he still is, you know, such a cute and cordial and curious Austrian that you always want to have around. And, you know, and to the point of despairing, he'd always say, yes, well, we can get this done in spite of all the challenges we threw his way. And that made us all depend on him, mentally and physically. Do we still have time? May I say one more thing? You know, I was thinking about the contradictions, to come back to that. Because yesterday we did a bit of press work and we also watched the movie, just a few of us in a smaller circle. And, I mean, it's also happening in the movie, and we also talked about that yesterday, the dysfunctional family. I think it's just such an interesting term, because it is a term that, you know, makes you try to distance yourself from that. And it also allows you to imagine that there's something like a functional family. Well, I'd say it's only machines that always function. Human beings don't function, and that is what turns them into human beings. And if we ever can make our peace with that, with these contradictions, just like Bertolt Brecht said, he said contradictions represent hope. Well, if we can make our peace with that, we could make major progress, because our societies right now are ailing because of these categories of good and bad and wrong and right and black and white and right and left, because it's a kind of a black and white thinking that in psychology is known as cognitive distortion and basically madness. You know, to just think in black and white, you know, to have these kinds of extreme thoughts is a symptom of a borderline disorder, for example. And the very fact that we are now always called upon to have a very clear position, to position ourselves, you know, unambiguously, and that we're always forced to, you know, look at complex situations and try to package them in posts and tweets that always lack the necessary depth and complexity. They have to undermine this complexity, and that means that we always run the risk to think along these extreme lines and to just admit to ourselves that we are flawed beings, ambivalent beings that can make mistakes, and whose most dominant characteristic is that we are contradictive, you know. And to be able to live with that would be an enormously important step. And interestingly, in the movie, we as parents are being confronted with that by our children. So they confront us with our own contradictions. And that is a point where I think, well, it just goes to show how courageous it is of a filmmaker to present himself in, you know, your own flawed state, and that this really opens up a great opportunity. And that's why, you know, I was really happy after a certain time that we will be in the opening movie. You know, first I was a bit sad that we were not part of the competition, but I really think that this film has the potential to be important for these debates that we're dealing with every day. And I would claim that, you know, everyone feels the same in the respect that, you know, there is no single day where you're not called upon to, you know, position yourself with a view to what's happening politically, and, you know, and to use this film as a starting point to not just enter into the debates in order to be able to say, well, this one's right and that one's not right, but to perhaps even find something that allows us to live with this contradiction and that both parties might be right. That is, I think, also the objective of a festival like this. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a very nice closing word, and it's not just being screened in the Berlinale Palast, but also in 7 cities in Germany at the same time. So it's being distributed. And then on the 20th of March, it will be screened in cinemas. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here with us. The Light by Tom Tykwer.
I mean, I kept my attention when I was concentrating, yeah.